Greetings, friends. Today we will talk about the meaning and purpose in human life, or more precisely about how the famous Austrian psychologist Viktor Frankl talked about these concepts. And so, what did Frankl's famous speech about the meaning and purpose in life carry? The meaning of life. Today, this notion is worn to tatters. This notorious meaning was searched for by ancient philosophers. This same meaning is speculated on by various religious movements, from multi-million confessions to outright destructive sects. But only a few can answer why the search for the meaning of life is so important to us. And what is more important, the meaning of life itself, or the search for that meaning? As a wise man once said, the goal is not as important as the path to that goal. Homo sapiens, which means man of reason. Therefore, reason is what distinguishes us from animals. An animal lives on instinct. No animal will ever think about the meaning of life, because an animal's consciousness, if it is correct to speak of consciousness of all functions somewhat differently, it simply gives out ready-made solutions based on the personal experience of a particular individual, or based on an instinctive base embedded deep in the subconscious. This is the essence of conditioned and unconditioned reflexes, which Pavlov studied in such detail. Therefore, the meaning of life for an animal is the realization of its instincts, of which there are four basic ones: eating, sleeping, reproduction, and safety. If all four are satisfied, we can say that the meaning of life of an animal has been realized. But what can we say about man? Can we say that the meaning of his life is the realization of these needs? The question is debatable, I guess. Yes and no. Of course, without adequate food, sleep, and so on, a person cannot develop, and we can speak of any meaning only when basic needs are met. But there is also the other extreme, when a person limits his existence to these basic needs. So what is the meaning of human life, and how do we find it? One view of this problem is given by the legendary speech of the Austrian psychiatrist, Viktor Frankl. And the wisdom of this famous psychologist Viktor Frankl is based on much more than just textbooks. He himself went through a long imprisonment in a Nazi concentration camp, and this apparently enabled him to look at life differently. In any case, his point of view on this issue can be considered authoritative to a certain extent. So what did Viktor Frankl say in his famous speech, long famous on the internet? In his speech on the meaning of life, Viktor debunks the popular misconception that most people are only interested in making money, increasing income, and so on. He cites statistics according to which only 16% of American students have as a goal in life a good salary, but as for 78% of respondents, their main problem was the search for the meaning of life. Whether it was the search for the meaning of human life as such, or whether they were more concerned about finding their purpose in this life, statistics are silent, but the fact that most young people are concerned not so much about material well-being as the realization of their destiny already speaks volumes. This is the difference between man and animal. Man cannot simply live as a robot in accordance with the given algorithms of behavior. Sooner or later, he will inevitably begin to question himself about the meaning of his actions. This is a feature of the human psyche. Even if a child can do things without thinking, and do them simply because adults, through their authority, have instilled in him that this is the right thing to do, as he develops and matures, the child will still begin to ask questions, and the statistics of American students surveyed are a prime example of this. The vast majority of American youth consider the search for the meaning of life to be the main problem. As for the 16% mentioned earlier, there are two options: either they have already defined their own meaning of life, or this issue for them is not yet relevant. For information on how to achieve your goals and how to find the best path to success, please also read our official website.
Subscribe to the Summary Club and watch short versions of the most popular and useful videos every day.
Frankl's famous speech on the meaning of human life was filled with examples. Here is a very interesting and, most importantly, mega teaching example. If a pilot flies from point A to point B, but a north wind is blowing, which will inevitably blow the plane away, then the pilot takes his course somewhat northward and only then can he arrive at the target point. Snipers also have a similar tactic called correcting for the wind. In giving this example, Frankl said that the same law applies in human relationships. Taking someone as they are at the moment only makes them worse. After all, it has long been known that a person is largely created by his environment. There are many vivid examples of this. In the history of mankind, there have been many cases in which, for certain reasons, children were taken into the wild and raised by animals, monkeys, wolves, and so on. And what happened when people finally found such children? Alas, these children were only outwardly human, but all their habits, and instincts were like animals. And the saddest thing is that it is impossible to change anything drastically. The most that could be done was to teach these children to eat with a spoon, brush their teeth, comb their hair, and utter some more or less articulate sounds, similar to the most primitive phrases. It's the same with all of us. If the people around us perceive, even without saying it out loud, us as a loser who won't get anywhere in life, then that's the way it will be. Until we either change our surroundings, or our surroundings change their view of us. And as experience shows, it is easier to do the first option. What did Frankl say about purpose in a person's life? Our environment conditions us. And only if we are surrounded by idealists who see only good in everything, including people, can we become who we are, like in the case of the plane. That is, a person can realize himself only if the people around him believe in his success, consider him talented, and in general, perceive him much better than he is at the moment. On some subtle, inexplicable level, this gives an impetus to development. Goethe wrote about this as far back as Goethe: if we regard man as he is, we make him worse than he is. That is, the paradox is this: to be a realist, one must be an idealist. That's why some families raise talented children who become successful, and other families have perpetual losers who can't achieve anything in life. And the reason for this, to a large extent, lies in childhood. If you tell a man 1,000 times that he is a pig, he will grunt. Moreover, even if we keep tactfully silent about it and simply perceive a person as such, it will affect reality. But the same law also works exactly the other way around. If we idealize a person and perceive him or her as he or she could be in the future, successful, talented, rich, kind, and so on, then that is how he or she will be. You can watch videos about how to succeed on our channel. Statistics show that more than 90% of orphanage graduates end up in penitentiary institutions, that is, simply in prison. Why is this so? Is it all the fault of the notorious genes, or some other semi-mythical factors? No. The whole point is that orphanage is practically a stigma in our society. And from the first days of life within the walls of an orphanage, a child is perceived as flawed, as a potential criminal, and so on. And when one leaves the orphanage, one is again confronted with the same attitude in a society that largely thinks in terms of stereotypes. And a person is literally left with no choice. Because the environment defines us very much, especially if a person has not yet acquired a stable character and independent thinking. Therefore, the fact that children from dysfunctional families grow up this way is partly our fault too. Viktor Frankl's opinion on the meaning of life was the following: the search for the meaning of life is almost a main factor that distinguishes man from an animal. And to awaken in man the thirst for this search is primarily the task of society and his parents. To perceive each person as unique, talented, able to achieve success, this is the secret and the key to forming a decent society, and even more so the duty, or if you want, the duty of every parent to their child. If, of course, parents have the task to bring up a successful and, most importantly, happy person. Thought and attitude do, in one way or another, shape reality. Everything we think about ourselves and those around us, sooner or later, becomes our reality. Therefore, as they say, be careful what you judge and say about other people, for they also end up shaping their personalities and character. Moreover, be even more careful with your own thoughts, because they ultimately shape your character. What you think about yourself today will very likely affect who and what you will be tomorrow. So, ideally, you should always be positive for others, and even more so for yourself. You should think of yourself and others even a little better than they really are. Then your thoughts will constantly correct your further flight in the right direction and bring you and your loved ones closer to the happiest, most successful and wisest life possible. We looked at the views on the purpose and meaning of human life in Viktor Frankl's famous speech. Remember that it is important not to forget what distinguishes a human being from an animal. This will help us to always remain human. Well, we wish you well and wisdom. And friend, don't forget to subscribe to the Summary Club for becoming more successful, educated, kinder and wiser every day. Save hundreds of hours and dollars spending on boring regular education. Feel free to write your opinions and questions about each video. We read all the comments. In addition, go to our official website where you can find reading materials or watch other videos on channel and links in the description. All the best.